Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This presentation is on presenting 4-H oral presentations online. My name is Nancy Shalstead. I'm a regional 4-H youth development educator, and co-presenting today is Carrie. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Carrie Johnson. I am the 4-H Extension Educator with UI Extension Canyon County.
Okay, so what we will go over today, we'll talk about a few things. We want to talk about different types of presentations. We also want to talk about the importance of nonverbal communication, going into a little bit on using online platforms and selecting an online platform that will work best for you, using visual aids on virtual presentations, then also interacting with the audience in a virtual presentation. So to start with, we want to just be sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about when we say oral presentations for 4-H projects. There are 5 basic types: demonstrations, illustrated talk, a public speech, a dramatic reading, TV commercial, and then we also included the impromptu speech. Impromptu speeches are typically used for training methods, practice sessions, just to get used to thinking on your feet, planning really quick, and then speaking about an object. It might be used for a club exercise where members will just draw an item out of a bag, and say you drew out a stapler, and then you have 30 seconds to prepare maybe a 2-minute speech on a stapler. So it is very much thinking on your feet and practicing, practice. But back to the more common oral presentations given with 4-H projects. First of all, a demonstration. Demonstration is when you show how to do something. You're showing how to mix up a batch of cookies, showing how to groom your horse, that type of thing. An illustrated talk is when you're telling about how to do something. And again, illustrated talks typically have visual aids associated with them. Very typically posters, but it can also be objects that you are telling about or describing. With a speech, the speech is just the spoken word. There are no props, there's no visual aids, and you're just speaking about a topic. Of course, note cards can be used, and many times those giving a public speech will maybe dress the part, dress appropriately for the topic that they're speaking about. Dramatic reading is a little bit less common than the first 3, but a dramatic reading is when you would read a portion out of a book or manuscript, something that has been published that talks about your 4-H project. For example, I saw a dramatic reading several years ago where a young person read out of C-Dub's Dutch oven cooking book, and a part on how to tell when you're cooking, when your pot is done. And it was very good, and they had very nice props set up around it. The dramatic reading, it must be from a published piece. It can be from another author, or you may write something, but it does need to be published first, and then you could do a reading from that. It can be read or it can be memorized. Now, TV commercial is not as common either, but it's also pretty fun to do. With a TV commercial, you would create an item or an idea and then present a TV commercial, quote, selling that item. You would not use any current products on the market. You do not use name brands, anything like that, but perhaps an item that you would create based on things that you've learned in your 4-H project. So those are 5 different types of oral presentations that you could give with your, with your 4-H project. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about putting your presentation together. Those are some basics that are true whether you're giving it in person or if you're giving it virtually. But we will, of course, recommend this resource for you on how to put your presentation together. There is a document titled Speak Up with Confidence, and you can see some sample pages of this on your screen. It is available on the University of Idaho Extension website. It's also available on the State 4-H page. This document contains 9 different tip sheets. You can see the first 2 of them here: putting parts of a presentation together, planning and organizing a presentation. The other topics include types of presentations, which we pretty much just went over. There's one on using multimedia, mechanics of presenting, getting your message across with posters. There's another sheet on creating creative hooks to start your presentation. And then there's 2 additional tip sheets, one on food demonstrations and one on using live animals in your presentation. So this is a very good reference document for you. We'd recommend that you download this document, take a look at it. It's not a read from front to back type document, but just pieces that you can reference and learn a little bit more about certain parts of your presentation. Moving on to nonverbal communication. Nonverbal is so very important. What we know is that 93% of communication is nonverbal. So that means 93% includes your eye contact, your posture, your gestures and facial expressions, and your tone and volume of voice. Only 7% is actually what you say, is the spoken word. So you can see how the nonverbal communication is so very important, both when you're presenting in person and when you're presenting online. So let's talk a little bit more about that. A few things that are different. When you're presenting online, remember you still need to make eye contact. Now you don't have an audience. There's a possibility that you would be sitting in a room by yourself, such as I am today, and Carrie is on her end as well. We don't have people to actually look at. So remember, the webcam is your audience, and that's where you need to make eye contact, is with your webcam. If it's helpful, put a picture of a group of people behind your webcam so that when you look up where your webcam is, you are actually looking at people. If that would be helpful, do it. Do it. It might be helpful. Also keep in mind your posture. If you are sitting while you are giving your oral presentation, which is probably more common when you're giving presentations online versus in person, remember to sit up straight, lean forward slightly, and that shows that you're interested and you're engaged in what you're saying, and you're engaged with your audience. If you lean back, say I were to lean back like this, 1, it's harder to see me, and 2, it just looks like I'm not as interested, I'm not as engaged with you. So lean forward, be engaged. If you're standing, keep your feet even on both feet. Try to avoid swaying back and forth, especially online. You could very easily sway out of the view of your camera. So practice standing still. A few natural gestures are fine though, but practice standing still. Gestures and facial expression. Keep your gestures and facial expressions natural. There's no need to be overly animated with what you're saying and doing, but just keep them natural, just like you would in person. Keep in mind your tone and volume. Be sure to test your microphone and adjust the volume of your microphone before you start presenting. You want to be sure that you can be heard. If you need to raise your voice to be heard, it comes across as being a little frustrating or possibly yelling, and we certainly don't want that. So try and keep your tone and volume at a normal talking level. And so from here, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, and she's going to talk a little bit more about online platforms and how to choose one.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So as your club is getting started in meeting online, your club volunteer leader may or may not have already chosen a platform for your club to meet. If not, we have a couple of different tips, things to look for in all of the different platforms that are available that hopefully will help you choose one that is the right fit for your club. And you know, there are a lot out there right now. Nancy and I are actually utilizing the Zoom platform to record this. A lot of extension programs are using that, but I know a lot of schools are using Google's platforms. I know of other clubs that have looked at Facebook Messenger. Skype is a possible other one that I've heard of. And so there are a lot out there that you can look at and have different features. But a few things that we would recommend looking at is looking for one that's free to use. You know, a lot of these are free to use, so you know, try to pick one of those. Try to find one that you know, can have many people join with video. So think about the fact that so much of the communication is nonverbal. You want to be able to see people so that you can see their facial expressions, their gestures, things like that. You would also want to probably find one that has the ability for people to share their screen. Again, for example, the presentation that you're looking at and watching today is being shared. It's a PowerPoint presentation that Nancy and I have prepared, and we are sharing our screen with you so that you can see the presentation. And I know many of the programs that I talked about have that capability, but take a look for yourself and see how those features work. And you also want people to be able to mute and unmute their microphones as you go through your meeting. You know, think about how an oral presentation and how meetings go. You need to be able to have people be quiet when it's appropriate and listen to the speaker, but also be able to ask questions and get clarification. So think through some of those things and find the right platform for your club. So once you have found the right platform, we have a couple of best practices that we would like to emphasize for you. If you are able to, it's best to keep your camera on, and that means everybody. That can be a little difficult and maybe a little distracting at times when you're first getting used to it, but it really is best. Again, it's that nonverbal communication piece. And as you're setting up your camera, you know, some things to think through. So as you're looking at the image of you through the camera screen, it's important to think about the position and composition of you, whether you're sitting or standing. You might want to be centered in the middle, or if you have a visual aid that you're sharing live on the screen with you, where is that going to be and how is that position going to look? We also recommend using as plain and neutral of a background as possible, just to help minimize distractions or anything like that. We also recommend looking at wearing solid colors, meaning your clothing. So typically when you're presenting live, you know, you might have a patterned shirt, you might have plaid, you might have flowers, you might have something on your shirt that's not quite as solid. For whatever reason, through a camera, that can be distracting. It can be a little bit busy. So we recommend wearing a solid color to help reduce that. And also avoid wearing solid white or black. For whatever reason, people are finding that that is not showing as well through the camera either. So kind of think through your outfit as well. Also, think about the lighting wherever you're presenting. You know, you want to give the best view of yourself, and you have this great opportunity to do that through all of these things. So natural light works great with almost every camera. So if you're able to utilize some natural light, that will really help you. I know here in the room that I'm presenting in, I have a window to the left side of me that has some natural light coming in, but I also supplemented that with an overhead light just to help get rid of some of the shadows on my face. You might have to look at some other lamps, things like that. Just make sure that it's not like so bright it's blinding. So, you know, try a few things out and see what's best. We also recommend that whatever platform you choose, that as you're presenting and as everybody is presenting, that you use the speaker view. So meaning that the speaker is the person highlighted. So if you've been in on some of our meetings or some of the Zoom meetings, you might have seen on a PC what we kind of jokingly refer to as the Brady Bunch view, meaning everybody is a little box and you see many, many little boxes on the screen. If you go up to, on the PC, if you go up to the upper right, on the video, you can see where my image is. There would normally be a couple of settings in that corner that you could click on and change that view. So that way the person who's speaking is the largest, or if they're share screening, hopefully you can still see them. That way, again, you are still having that nonverbal communication come through. So a couple of other things, you know, when you're presenting, you're the person leading the club meeting. So asking all of your participants to mute while the person who is giving the oral presentation is talking is really good. And if you are the person presenting, it's okay to remind people to mute. You know, it's just like when you're presenting in person and people have kind of side conversations or they blurt something out, we want to minimize that while you're presenting. So another thing too, if you're able to have a designated teen or adult who can assist you, especially with technology. So if you are able to have somebody who is in the same house as you, same home, maybe a parent or an older brother or sister, or somebody who is pretty comfortable with technology, either they can be your camera person if they need to hold the camera, or just able to help you with settings. You know, sometimes when you're presenting, you just get nervous, and it's okay. So if you're able to have that person who can just help you with the technology piece and is right there with you. If need be, it might be still somebody who is at a different site, like your volunteer or a team leader. So just kind of have that worked out ahead of time. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. We've got just a few more best practices for you to think through. So if you are looking at your visual aid, if it's something that you made or something you want to share, try to have that visual aid in the camera field with you, or share your screen. So you want to be able to also share the hard work of your visual aid, but also make sure that you are able to explain everything and that they're able to see the visual aid well. And we have examples later on in the presentation to show you some ways that we thought you might be able to handle that. Also, while you're presenting, try to think through ways that you can eliminate distractions and disruptions. You know, you're presenting in your home or outside. Think about some of the different things that might come along that could interrupt your presentation. For example, you know, it's been a while since we've all been in in-person meeting, but remember to silence your cell phones. You know, it's probably been a while since you've heard that. If you're presenting or watching in your kitchen, you might want to wait to run your dishwasher or your washing machine, depending on where you are in your house. Some other things to think about are younger siblings, pets. Just let everybody in the house know when your presentation is or when the meetings are. So just some other things to think through. I would really recommend not to avoid playing a video in your presentation. Now, I know a lot of people, when you're doing a live oral presentation, like to share videos. Well, this can be a little bit of a difficulty when you're working with different bandwidths. So, you know, my bandwidth is different than Nancy's bandwidth just because of where we live and our internet provider, and that's okay. But for whatever reason, video tends to get a little garbled and not play at the same time for people. So I recommend that you either share the video ahead of time before your presentation and ask everybody to watch it, or share it afterwards as something to reinforce what you're teaching in your presentation. So some other things to think about, and especially for any 4-H volunteers that are watching this presentation, we really recommend that you make a club plan for your oral presentations. And this is based off of some feedback that we've heard from a few clubs that have already had oral presentations online. It's really important to kind of lay out the ground rules, let everybody know what the plan is, especially for questions and especially for the use of the chat box. So, you know, just again, like if you were having a live meeting where everybody was gathered together, you want to reduce side conversations. You know, having the chat box dinging or popping up or making a little notification is really distracting for the person presenting. So we would recommend that everybody refrain, or if you're able to turn off that setting while the person or whoever is presenting for the club. And then, of course, ask everybody to wait on questions until the very end of the presentation when it's called for. So make sure that the ground rules are made known to everybody before the presentations start, and then remind everybody at the end as well. So some other things. So as we're presenting online, I alluded a little bit in the last slide, a little bit about bandwidth. So, you know, internet connection is different for everybody. And we have some pretty rural places in Idaho, and we have some fairly urban places as well. So some things that will help you is to think through having everybody who's going to join in the club meeting to use the same piece of technology to connect for the meeting. For example, this picture here shows 3 young people who are using various pieces of technology. If they were to join in on the same 4-H meeting, we would recommend that they pick one of the computers or the tablet and just join in together. And if one of them were presenting, one of them could be the person to help with technology, and the others could just watch and be the live audience. So another thing too, you know, limit the number of people online while you're presenting. You know, we know that not everybody joins in from family joins the club meeting every single time, and that's okay. But maybe have a plan that, you know, maybe somebody who's not joining could read a book instead of using the internet, or do chores, or do something else that won't draw from your bandwidth. And then if you really need to, if you're having trouble, you can just turn your camera off while you're presenting. It's not ideal. You do want to, again, have that nonverbal, but if you are sharing your screen, we found that that also takes up quite a bit of bandwidth. So if you're starting to break up or people are telling you that they can't quite hear you, if you turn off your camera, that will help with sound. So you'll still have that tone of voice and everything else as part of your nonverbal communication. And another trick that you can look at is hardwiring in. Depending on your modem or your router, sometimes Wi-Fi is not as strong as just hardwiring into your equipment. So think about that, and that might be better for you. All right, so as you're preparing, and hopefully starting to practice with some of the technology and work through how this is going to work for you, you know, some other things to think about the day that you are going to present is to have your documents already open before you even join the meeting. So that way you're not trying to find on your computer, or if you've done a Google Slides presentation, where that is. You're prepared. It's just like bringing your poster to your club meeting. It's already there and you're ready to go. Try, if you can, to log in at least 15 to 20 minutes early so that you can check out all of your audio and your video settings and make sure that everything is working the way you want it to. If you have a handout, try to send that out ahead of time to everyone in your club, or ask your club leader to do that for you. That way they already have it in hand and can have it ready. Some things here at the bottom, we want to highlight just a couple of settings that you might want to pay attention to. So Nancy is circling for me the unmute button. That red line through there means that the sound is muted on that. If you click on it, it would turn off, that red line would go away, and that would mean you are ready to talk. Next to that is the start video. Same thing, the red line means that your video is off. If you push it, your video will come on. The little carrots next to each one of those is where you can find settings for your microphone, which is the unmute, and the start video, which is your video camera. So for example, if you are using some sort of PC setup with a screen and maybe have a couple of cameras that are available, or a couple of different microphones, if you say use a headset that has a microphone as well on a laptop, that's where you would be able to find the controls for which microphone or which video camera you might be using. Also, other things to look at, the chat box there is a really important button to know. Whenever a chat comes through, you'll see a number of how many chats are there, and it'll kind of flash, and you might see a little bit of text. So again, that's where, if everybody can refrain from asking questions as you're presenting, That way it doesn't just get distracting. And there, the green share button, share screen, is also a really important button to know and get familiar with before you present. So when you click on that, what happens is you will see a bunch of little screens of everything open on your computer, all of the different possibilities of things that you can share. And so you want to be able to quickly select the right presentation or the right document that you want to share. A really good trick is to shut down anything else on your computer, any other programs that you might have open. That way you can more easily find the one that you want. So just a couple of other things to help you get prepared. Some other things to keep in mind is interacting with your audience. So one of the traditional things for a 4-H project oral presentation is to ask for questions at the end. And so, you know, it's okay to, again, you are leading the club meeting at the time that you're doing your oral presentation. So you want to remind the audience, if you're able to, what the plan is for questions. We do recommend that you still ask for questions at the end. That way everybody knows that you're ready for those questions. And then whatever the club plan is, still repeat the question. You know, I think that's important because it, one, gives you a little bit of time to think through your answer, but it also helps you to clarify the question as well, and just in case you're not quite sure what they're asking. So go ahead and repeat the question. Depending on what your club plan is, you know, I would recommend that if you're sharing your screen, you stop sharing your screen so that you can see everybody in that little Brady Bunch view, and you can see if anybody is trying to talk. Because if you see somebody and their mouth is moving, but you're not hearing sound, they may still be unmuted. They still may be muted. So remind them to unmute so that you can hear their question. And then if the plan is to have everybody type their question into the chat box and somebody reads that questions or you read the questions, you know, remind people that that's the plan. And then whoever is monitoring that, you can ask them if they can read the questions to you. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. We found that a lot of people typically plan to do either an illustrated talk or a demonstration for their oral presentation. So we want to talk a little bit and focus some on visual aids. So depending on what you might have available in your house, this could be pretty easy or a little bit challenging. So what we recommend is that you start by assessing what is available for you to use. Look around your house, kind of see what you have, and check out what you might be able to do with that. So some examples of things you might typically use for a visual aid, you might use a digital presentation. We found that PowerPoint and Google Slides are typically what most youth are pretty familiar with because of school or other things. There's lots of other digital presentations, and as long as you have a share screen capability, you should be able to share whatever that is. Some other things that you might typically use: poster, markers, items that are related to your project, or maybe even a project animal. So the picture here are some things that I was able to gather here in my house. I was the person who went to the grocery store as well, so I was able to pick up a poster board. So I didn't actually have the poster board, but I was able to grab that pretty quickly as I went through the grocery store. But I had paper and markers and glue and tape and scissors and all of those things already available to me. But what if you don't have the usual supplies? What if those things aren't available? Well, it's time to have a little bit of fun and think creatively, think outside the box. Still, again, take a look around your house. You might have a piece of cardboard or plywood that you could turn into the back or use as a replacement for your poster board. And with permission, you might be able to use a door or a wall as well. And again, make sure you ask permission. Different types of paint can have tape on them and some can't. So make sure that you ask ahead of time, you know, if that's okay. maybe you have an animal that normally wouldn't be ready to go to your club meeting and join in, but might be okay being, joining through a camera. So think about that a little bit. Look at the different types of paper or paint or other things that you might have in your house. So this picture is also stuff that I found in my house. I got a little creative, and I had a couple of cereal boxes that I was able to tape together because I didn't have one large piece of cardboard. I found some wrapping paper that I thought would work pretty well. I found some ribbon, yarn, glitter, different types of paint and brushes that I could possibly use. But I also found for pointers an old beef show stick. I used to show beef in 4-H, and I still had my show stick, so that could be a great pointer to use. But I also had a dowel that I typically use for helping to hold up a plant, but I wasn't using it right now. And it is able to be repurposed as well into a pointer. So try to think a little bit outside the box. You might be surprised, and you might have a little bit of fun with getting creative. So we did do a couple of examples to show you what you might be able to do at home. So in the first set of slides, I looked at a possible oral presentation that might be typical for a lot of younger 4-H members or new to a certain project 4-H members. And I tried to look at different ways that you could possibly present this. So in this example, I looked around my house to see what I had. And I fortunately live with a 4-H volunteer. So this is Jason. And he's going to pretend today to be an 8-year-old boy doing his first oral presentation for horse on the parts of a Western saddle. So we started out by looking at a reliable source, so the 4-H Horse Project book, which is available for download for free on the state 4-H website. And we were able to find this page on Western tack and all of the parts of a Western saddle. And so in the middle picture, we set up Jason outside a garage door with my grandfather's old saddle. So if you're a horse person, I'm sorry about the state of it. It hasn't been on a horse since the 80s, but it's what I have at home. And so Jason was able to use the dowel to just point at the different parts as he was talking about the parts of a Western saddle. And so in our mind, this would have been done live. I would have been the camera operator, and he would have simply pointed and talked and been able to do his presentation this way. Another way that we thought maybe would work for some people is to also label the parts with pieces of paper. And you could take pictures and either put them on a slide or share the pictures. And then as Nancy is the person who's sharing the slideshow today, she's right now using the mouse to highlight the different parts of the saddle. Typically, you would be sharing so you could control the mouse yourself. That's okay, we're making it work today. And so you could do that either with the parts labeled or with the parts not labeled. So you have a couple of different options. It's kind of the nice thing about presenting online. You still have lots and lots of different ways that you can do this. So looking at the next slide, we also thought that you could, using a piece of tack that's just as dynamic and that 3D aspect as a saddle, where you have different parts and pieces up and under and all around. You could even take advantage of the fact that you could take pictures from different angles and really highlight those pieces of a saddle. Again, using your mouse, you could show either the individual slides, pictures, because you can just share a photo, or you could put them on a slide like this, or each photo on a slide and go through whatever makes sense to the person who is presenting. So you could also just do it pointing with a stick like I am in that last picture. So there's lots of different ways that you could do that. Another example would be to just take a static picture like this, and you could actually program a digital presentation. So every time you click, it shows another arrow and another label for a part. And I only did 3 parts just for the example here, but you could do the whole thing this way. You could change the slides, but you have lots and lots of options for how you could do this type of a presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Nancy.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. We're going to talk a little bit now about posters as visual aids. And there's several different ways that you can present a poster when presenting online as well. Here are 2 examples, and I'll show you a third example here in just a minute. One is to, maybe your poster is not the size that you would normally do it. The picture on the left shows a poster that is just a regular paper size, 8.5 by 11 size, and it has everything on it that the larger poster does. So if you want to handle your visual aid like this and just hold it up next to you, maybe it doesn't have to be a large poster. The other way to do it, or a second way to do it, would be to go ahead and create a full-sized poster, and then you could stand beside it and point to the different items on the poster as you go. In this case, what I did was I had the poster sitting on, this is actually a puzzle table that we happen to have at home, propped up against a stool to make it high enough to present next to. So these are 2 ways that you can present a poster. And I'm going to stop sharing our presentation here just real quick and show you a third way that you could share your poster. And that is just to do a separate screen share of your poster. And this makes it nice and big on your screen for everybody to see. And then you can go through and with your mouse point to the different aspects of the poster as you talk about them. So that would be a third way that you can do it. If you do choose to do your screen share, just remember to be familiar with the technology to get back and forth between your presentation and your poster without a whole lot of delay. So just be sure you're familiar with the technology to do that. It's once you do it a couple of times, you can do it. You can do it. Another thing about posters and the view that you might get. This is the slide on the left, or the picture on the left. This would be potentially your view of what you are seeing, but don't panic. This is called the mirror view. It's just a setting in under your video, the video camera that we were showing you earlier. But your audience will see this view and everything will be showing correctly. So just keep that in mind. And by the way, this is the poster that Carrie created out of the cardboard cereal boxes and the wrapping paper. I think it turned out pretty good. So good job on that. Another way, if you're actually doing a demonstration, is to have the video camera back. It's much less like you're sitting in front of a computer, but maybe the video camera is set back a little bit and you're having someone operate the camera to be able to show what you're doing. This would be an example of, although I would do this as a live video, not necessarily a set of pictures, but as a live video of, I believe she's making chocolate chip cookies here. So she's got all of her ingredients measured out in glass bowls, which is very proper for foods presentation. She's got all of the ingredients measured, ready to put them in the mixing bowl in the proper order. And then she's got it mixed up and putting the cookies on a baking tray to go into the oven. So you can see how this whole process can be done from one location. She hasn't moved from the counter where she's at, but has practiced moving the visual aids to different places, because in the third picture, we no longer see all of the ingredient bowls and the mixer's turned a little bit, which is fine. That's great. It's a good place for it. So keep in mind you can do that as well. We also mentioned earlier that presenting online or virtually can offer some advantages if you want to use your animal in a live oral presentation. In this case, again, this is our 4-H volunteer, Jason, who is being an 8-year-old and practicing doing a presentation with his dog. And this is Daisy. And Daisy's a really good girl, but she gets a little anxious, likes to go and see and check things out, gets distracted pretty easily when with a group. But out here, Daisy's perfectly fine. She minds very well. She's not distracted. And so our 8-year-old Jason is able to do a presentation on dog obedience. So again, a big advantage to presenting online, especially for that animal. So keep in mind that you can use animals in different ways to do that. But let's take a look at lighting. In the previous slide, it was looking pretty good, but you need to think about your lighting when you are filming or giving a live presentation online. The slide on the left has some pretty strong backlighting, and then in the center is side lighting, and on the right hand side is front lighting. And so think about how that looks. In this example, I would just ask you to think about which lighting shows off what Jason is doing and what the dog is doing best. In the backlit picture, you see a lot of shadows. You can't really see Jason's facial expressions. You can't really see exactly, you know, what he's doing. It's just not a great picture. There's a lot of shadows. In the center picture, the side light, you can see much better. And the front lit, you can definitely see the dog very well. You can see facial expressions very well. Potential downside for a really strong front lit picture could be that the person that you're doing the picture of, in this case Jason, if it was very bright out, he would have a hard time seeing you. And it looks like he might be wearing sunglasses in this picture. And that's maybe not a best choice. So if it's too bright, maybe go to more of a side light where the person being videoed or behind the camera is not squinting and can see much better. So just a few things to think about. Big piece of advice, practice, practice, practice on your presentation, just like you would in person. It's just that you have a few more things to take into account. Practice your presentation, practice using the technology, and be sure that you prepare the area that you will be presenting in. Prepare the area well. So in this picture, there it is. In this picture, what would you do different? Is this a great setup? I would start by saying it's a good clean background. Are there a few distractions? Well, kind of. In this case, perhaps Daisy was a little distracted and wandered into the horse presentation. So you'll be sure that your animals are put away, that they're not going to wander through your presentation. Consider maybe a little bit, not quite as strong of lighting. While in this picture, Jason does not have his sunglasses on, we also can't see his face really well. We can't see his eyes. Possibly taking the camera angle over to the right a little bit further, then the shadow would go out this way rather than into the picture. So look at the shadows. This is our camera operator here. Look at the shadows. They could be out over in this area and not be in the picture at all. So again, practice, practice, practice. And you'll see these things and feel much more comfortable with your presentation as you go to present online. So that concludes our presentation. We talked about what presentations are. We talked about some online tips and identifying a platform and working with visual aids and cleaning up your workspace. We welcome any questions. You can see both my email address and Carrie's email address here on the screen. You're welcome to send us any questions at any time. We'll be happy to help you if we can. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And Carrie, if you have any closing comments?
Well, just thank you again for joining us, and hope your presentations go wonderfully.
As one last note, there is also a document that can accompany this presentation with much of the information just written out in a document, and it will be posted as soon as it is available, either along with this presentation, or again, feel free to email either Carrie or myself and we'll be happy to send it to you. Thank you so much.